Hey guys, my name is Mike, and I used to be a bouncer in the biggest nightclub in New York City. I did that for many years, and it was a great job. By biggest nightclub, I mean we took up half a city block, had 5 floors in the club, and each floor you had different types of music. So usually in the basement we'd be playing like dubstep. The floor above that was more of just kind of like dance music, but kind of like not really romantic, right? But it was like pop music. It was like remixes of like pop music. And then the floor above that was like techno, trance, EDM. You know, we had we'd bring in big artists. We had like Chainsmokers, Tiesto, that kind of stuff. And then above that we had like a VIP lounge. So it was awesome. It was a big club, really cool. Multiple themes, and you'd fit 2,000 to 6 or 8,000 people in there a night, depending on who was coming. So it was massive, and I was part of a security team. It was like 10 to 30 guards that would be working there, depending on how many people were coming. If we were gonna have a huge night with like thousands and thousands of people, I mean, we'd try and bring in additional security to help us. When we get to that like 6,000 plus range, but 2 to 5,000 was pretty average night for us. So we part of our job was you had a security team that was outside, and they would screen people to make sure we didn't have organized crime trying to come in, professional gangs, and I call them professional gangs. So like the Bloods, the Crips, Latin Kings, right? So in New York City, those are big gangs, and they were real like serious gangs at the time. Still are, I suppose. And they're trying to get their drug dealers in to sell drugs, because a drug dealer can walk in there and make $10,000 to $30,000 a night, and that was big source of revenue for any gang that can get their dealers in. So we didn't want that. We didn't want creeps coming in. Some guy who's coming in alone, but he looks like a fucking predator, some pervert. We had that happen all the time. Attempted rape, sexual assaults, that kind of stuff. It didn't happen because it didn't happen that much. Every now and then a guy gets in. Somebody would get in through, they'll slip in through the cracks. But for the most part, we did a good job of keeping that kind of shit out. We had a great security team manager who was above me. But my job, there was the guys on the outside that would work as like literally the doorman, and they would also check IDs and that kind of stuff. And then on the inside, you go in after you got searched, you'd buy your tickets if you didn't have them, and there was an additional layer of security that would search people for drugs, for guns, for knives, any kind of contraband before they come into the club. Bottles of alcohol, right? A flask. We confiscated a lot of flasks. People trying to sneak in a little bit extra booze or whatever. Obviously, we confiscated lots of drugs. We would confiscate them, throw them out, destroy the drugs right in front of them, or we would arrest them, depending on what it was, depending on what their intent was and their attitude. You caught somebody with a little baggie of coke, and they were apologetic or whatever. We'd throw out the drugs and we'd throw them out. Or we'd throw out the drugs and let them come in, depending on what their attitude was like. But if they looked like they were going to be a liability, or they already were kind of strung out on whatever they were on, we didn't want that person coming in there and then overdosing and then causing a problem for our club. We didn't want to have that reputation of being this is a place where a lot of underage kids can get drunk, and you can buy drugs inside the club. Oh, it's a great place. Yeah, tons of drugs to buy in there. We don't want to get that reputation and lose our licenses or get any kind of bad press. We already were in the press a lot because we're such a big club. But my job is, I was really kind of our head of narcotics, and so I helped make a lot of decisions on if we were going to arrest somebody or not. And I was very good at finding drugs, finding drug dealers and that kind of stuff. So one night I was working in this area. I was working at this area called we would let people outside of the club, out front of the club, into a pen that we kind of built, and we'd call it the smoking section. So people want to go smoke a cigarette or whatever, they go out there and smoke a cigarette. and then they can come back in and continue partying. Thing is that when people left through, and this was called, what we called the back door. So the front door, there's a huge long line, hundreds of people in line trying to come in or whatever. But the back door is, where people would go outside to go smoke cigarettes. And when people go out the back door to go smoke, they would have to come back in. They have to show their wristband or a stamp on their hand or whatever, right, to come in. And we give them wristbands. Well, sometimes we give them stamps too, and then people would, whatever. I'll tell you more stories about what kind of shit people would do. But the thing is that with the back door, people would go outside to their back door to go have a cigarette, and they would actually just go down the street to where they had a parked car, or maybe where they stashed some drugs in a bush somewhere or behind a trash can, and they'll go pick that up and stuff them, stuff a couple baggies of coke in their sock, or wherever, inside their hats, or just put it in their pockets and try and walk back into the club. So they would come in, from finishing a cigarette, and putting drugs in their pocket, and they would just show their wristband or their stamp, walk back into the club, and then they'd run into me. So I'm standing and I'm patting people down as they come back in from smoking. And most of the time, 90% of what the reason was, not 90, but I would say like 60 to 70% of the reason that we wanted to search people coming back in is to make sure that they were not coming back in with a gun or a knife. We wanted to keep people safe. Our primary concern was making sure they didn't get pissed off at somebody inside the club and said, fuck that dude, I'm going to kill him, or I'm going to stab him, or I'm going to slash his face and teach him a lesson. Same thing with the girls. Girls would do this too. So we'd make sure they were not coming back in with a knife to cut somebody or hurt somebody that they were disrespected by. But then the other percentage of that, 30 to 40%, we're patting them down to make sure they're not a drug dealer coming back in with drugs to sell in the club, because they thought they could outsmart us. Oh, I know I'm going to get a hard search when I come in through the front door. When I come in through the back door, there's going to be one guy back there who's going to be whatever. He's going to be stressed. He's not going to do a good job. He's going to pat me down for weapons, and that's it. Well, wrong. I was there, and I knew the game. I knew what you're up to, and I would catch people back there all the time. We'd catch drug dealers and or just random people coming back in, and they would stick a baggie of coke in their pocket. Sometimes people would come in through the front door and they had coke in their wherever. They managed to sneak it in anyways, and then I would catch them when they were coming back in from smoking. So I had this guy come in, and he, this was some big white dude, looked like a big football player, and he was, I don't know, 6'7", something like that. Very broad dude, and he was not an actual football player. Like, we had celebrities and NFL players, the Giants and the Jets, were in New York, so we had those guys come in all the time. This isn't one of them, but whatever, some big dude with a big beard, and so he comes in, and I pat him down, and I'm like, hey, you wouldn't happen to have anything illegal on you? And I could immediately tell. Or I didn't even ask him that. I just usually say, hey, how's your night going, right? How you doing? And you can tell in their eyes when they start, they get really wide and they start looking around a little bit, like they're getting nervous, right? And a lot of people are very bad. It's not that a lot of people are very bad at hiding their emotions, in that state, especially when you're doing something illegal, like, walking around with a felon in your pocket. It's pretty scary. But somebody like me who had experience, I had years of searching people and talking with people and telling when people were hiding something. I have very, very high EQ, emotional intelligence, emotional quotient, extremely smart, and very good at reading people. And I could tell, I could tell very quickly if somebody had something illegal on them. So I already knew where they had it. And, I said, do you have anything illegal on you? And the guy said, oh, no, I'm fine. And I said, you sure? You're acting really nervous. And I said, look, man, it's not that big of a deal. If you got a little bit of coke or something like that, don't worry about it. He goes, no, I'm fine. I said, okay, well, let me check your wallet. And the guy looks at me, and he, boom, goes to punch me. I duck, and boom, miss his punch. I get up, and he's sprinting down the stairs to run out the door. So there's like a little staircase going up. He's sprinting down the stairs. Now the stairs were packed full of people coming back into the club. Now, normally I keep the line going very fast. I go do a quick little pat down. It took me 10 seconds or so to do a pat down. Boom, people were coming in. So I wasn't slowing people down. But this conversation I was having with this guy was slowing people down because it's a little narrow staircase. It's just me and him at the top of the stairs. So as he's sprinting down the stairs, he's just bowling people out of the way. Just running them over, trucking them. And I fucking, boom, chased this dude, chased after him. And I didn't know what he had on him. I didn't know if he was a dealer or what, if he had a decent amount. But I chase after him, and he's running across the street, and I jump on him, flying tackle, boom, knock him down to the ground. And there was a bunch of cops outside and security as well. And we all kind of controlled the block. I worked really closely with the police to help them deal with whatever drug numbers they're trying to get. And so the cops come running over and they go, "Hey, Mike, you okay?" I say, "Yeah." And, they grab the guy, put him in cuffs real quick. They say, "What's he running for?" And I pull his wallet out, open it up, and pull out a baggie of Coke. And I'm like, this is what he's running for. And they're like, "Oh, okay," So, the guy, was actually turned out to be really nice. He was super apologetic about it. And he's like, "Oh, man, I'm sorry. I just, I panicked. Got a little scared." And I was like, "You know what, don't worry about it," and I took the bag, ripped it open right in front of the cops, right in front of him, dumped it out on a sidewalk in a puddle. I said, "Don't worry about it, just have a nice night." And that was it. And we let him go, and he left. And, as much as that, might suck for some people to say, "Oh, why didn't you leave him alone? Why didn't you let him run out of the club or whatever?" First off, no idea why he's running, Is he a convicted felon, that shouldn't be in possession of coke? Was he a dealer? Did he have any other bad intentions? So we wanted to make sure our club was safe and our patrons were safe. So we had to kind of investigate, what's the point? Why is this guy running? But also, from a personal perspective, and as somebody who was addicted to drugs for a very long time, I really hope that led him to sobriety eventually. I hope that, going through that made him say, "God, I could have been arrested. His whole life could have flashed in front of his eyes. Man, my wife or my girlfriend would have seen this, could have left me. I could have lost my job. I could have gone to jail." He could have, totally, And if it wasn't for me just being like, he's just a good dude, and he had a nice attitude, we let him go. But yeah, he could have. So I hope he learned something positive out of that. So yeah, that's kind of what happens, in nightclubs when you're working with that. And I mean, that's one story that stood out to me because the guy was so big, and I remember seeing him just bowling down, just fucking plowing through people, as he's heading out, and that was a pretty intense story. I mean, intense. Seeing that guy running out there, boom, flying tackle the guy in the street. But I had lots of other similar stories, where I would do the same thing. Most of them, didn't have that much of an incident. Lots of times, people would fight with me and scuffle or something, but I'd get control of their hands really fucking quick and yoke them up and slam their head against the wall, whatever the fuck was needed. They would calm down really fucking quick. It didn't matter what size they were, because most of the time, if you get some big dude, he could be tall as shit, big muscular dude, but you grab him by his belt, you throw him off by his center, you throw off his center of balance and do a quick little leg sweep, and you just throw him to the ground. Guess what? All of a sudden, he goes from being 7 feet tall to being 2 feet tall, laying there on the ground. It doesn't fucking matter. How tall and how big somebody is. It's being a bouncer and having as much experience with fights and everything as I do, very few people actually scare me when it comes to fighting. So anyways, thanks for hearing my story. Like and subscribe.